Emily worked as a librarian in a quiet town near London. She was 28 years old and lived alone in a small flat above the bookshop where she had worked for the past 6 years, every morning. She would walk downstairs to open the shop, greeting the familiar smell of old books and fresh tea that Mrs. Henderson, the shop owner, always made. Her grandmother Rose had passed away 3 months ago on a cold winter evening. Rose had been the most important person in Emily's life since she was a small child. When Emily's mother died in a car accident when Emily was 12, Rose had taken her in without question. The old woman had been both grandmother and mother to Emily, teaching her to bake scones, to love books, and to be strong even when life felt hard. Rose had left behind a small house on Maple Street, filled with 40 years of memories and belongings. Emily had been putting off the task of sorting through everything. It felt too painful to go through Rose's things, like saying goodbye all over again. But the house needed to be cleared, and Emily knew she could not wait forever. On a rainy Saturday morning in early March, Emily finally gathered enough courage to tackle the attic. She wore her oldest clothes and tied her brown hair back in a ponytail. The narrow stairs creaked under her feet as she climbed up with a flashlight and some empty boxes. The attic was dusty and dim, lit only by one small window. Boxes were stacked everywhere, some labeled in Rose's neat handwriting, others mysterious and unmarked. Emily found Christmas decorations from when she was young, her old school reports that Rose had saved, and photo albums full of pictures of Emily growing up. She worked slowly, sometimes stopping to look at old photographs or to touch a dress that still smelled like Rose's lavender perfume. In one corner, behind a trunk full of quilts that Rose had made by hand, Emily found a small wooden box she had never seen before. Inside the box was some of Rose's jewelry, old letters from friends, and at the very bottom, a sealed white envelope with Emily's name written in Rose's careful handwriting. The envelope looked newer than the other papers, and Emily could tell that something important was inside. Emily's heart began to beat faster as she opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written on Rose's best writing paper, the kind she only used for special occasions. As Emily read the first few lines, her hands started to shake. The letter began with an apology. Rose wrote that she had kept a secret for over 20 years, and she was sorry for the pain it might cause. But she felt Emily needed to know the truth now that Rose was gone. Emily's father, William, had not simply abandoned them when Emily was 5 years old. As Emily had always believed, the truth was much more complicated. William had been sending letters to Emily through Rose all these years, every birthday, every Christmas, every important moment in Emily's life. William had written to her. He had also sent money to help with Emily's care and education. Rose had hidden all of it. She had kept the letters in a safe place and had used William's money for Emily's needs without ever telling her where it came from. Rose wrote that she thought she was protecting Emily from more heartache. She believed that William had hurt Emily enough by leaving, and that his letters would only confuse and upset her more. But there was more news in the letter, news that made Emily feel sick to her stomach. William was very sick with cancer and did not have long to live. Rose had learned this from his most recent letter, which had arrived just before Rose became ill herself. At the bottom of the page was William's address in a coastal town called Whitby, about 4 hours north by train. Rose wrote that she was leaving the decision to Emily. She could choose to reach out to William or not. But Rose wanted Emily to know that William had never stopped loving her or thinking about her. Emily sat on the dusty attic floor, holding the letter with trembling hands. Rain drummed on the roof above her head, and she could hear the wind rattling the small window She felt as if the whole world had shifted round her in the space of 5 minutes. For 23 years, Emily had carried anger in her heart toward her father. She had believed he was a selfish man who had walked away from his family without looking back. She had built her whole idea of herself round being the daughter who had been abandoned, the girl who had learned to be strong because she had no choice. Now, sitting in Rose's attic with dust motes dancing in the grey light, Emily learned that her father might have a completely different story to tell. Maybe he had not forgotten her after all. Maybe he had been thinking about her every day for 23 years, just as she had been thinking about him. But Emily also felt scared. What if she went to find William, and he disappointed her again? What if the letters Rose had hidden were not as loving as Rose claimed? What if William was still the same person who had hurt her family so long ago? Emily folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. She had a choice to make, and she did not know if she was brave enough to make it. Emily could not eat or sleep for days after finding the letter in Rose's attic. She would lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling of her small flat, her mind spinning with questions that had no answers during the day. She could barely focus on her work at the library. The words on the pages of books seemed to blur together, and she found herself reading the same sentence over and over again. Anger burned in her chest like a fire that would not go out. She felt angry at Rose for keeping such an enormous secret. For so many years, how could the woman who had raised her, who had taught her to always tell the truth, have hidden something so important? Emily felt angry at William too. If he really cared about her, why had he stayed away? Why had he sent letters through Rose instead of coming to see her himself? But mostly, Emily felt angry at herself. She was angry for caring, angry for hoping, angry for letting this news turn her whole world upside down. She had spent years building a life without her father. She had learned to be independent and strong. Now, with just one letter, all of that seemed to be falling apart. On Wednesday evening, exactly 1 week after finding the letter, Emily sat in her small living room staring at the fireplace. The letter was on the coffee table in front of her, and she had read it at least 20 times. Each time she read it, she felt more confused and more angry. In a moment of pure rage, Emily grabbed the letter and threw it into the fireplace. She struck a match and watched as the flames began to eat the edges of the paper. Rose's careful handwriting turned black and curled up, and William's address disappeared into ash as soon as the letter was completely burned. Emily felt sick to her stomach. She fell to her knees in front of the fireplace, trying to reach into the ashes, but it was too late. The letter was gone forever. Those might have been the only words her father had written to her, and now they were nothing but grey dust. Emily's life began to fall apart in small ways that grew bigger each day. At the library, she snapped at customers who asked simple questions. When Mrs. Patterson, a regular customer, asked for help finding a romance novel, Emily told her sharply that she should know where to look by now. When young Tom Miller asked for help with his homework, Emily sighed loudly and walked away without helping him. She stopped answering phone calls from her best friend Lucy, who had been calling every few days to check on her since Rose's death. Lucy left worried messages on Emily's answering machine, asking if she was okay and if she needed anything. Emily listened to the messages but never called back. Her boyfriend James tried to visit her flat several times, but Emily pretended not to be home. She would sit quietly on her sofa, listening to him knock on the door and call her name. James had been patient and kind during the months after Rose's death, bringing her soup when she was sad and holding her when she cried. Now she could not stand the thought of seeing anyone, especially someone who cared about her. Emily felt lost and angry at everyone, including herself. She felt like she was walking through her days in a fog. going through the motions of her normal life while inside she was screaming. She would go to work, come home, heat up a can of soup for a dinner, and go to bed early, only to lie awake for hours thinking about the letter she had burned. One afternoon in late March, Emily was working at the library when a little girl came in with her father. The girl looked to be about 6 years old. With curly red hair and a bright yellow dress, she was holding her father's hand tightly as they walked to the children's section. Emily watched from behind the front desk as the father and daughter settled into the comfortable reading corner. The father chose a picture book about a little bear who was afraid of the dark, and he began to read to his daughter in a gentle, patient voice. He did different voices for each character in the story, making the little girl giggle and clap her hands. Daughter's Emily watched them. Something inside her chest began to crack open. She thought about all the bedtime stories she had never heard, all the different voices her father might have done for her if he had been there. She thought about all the hugs she had missed, all the times she had fallen asleep alone instead of being tucked in by someone who loved her. Suddenly, Emily began to cry. The tears came fast and hard, and she could not stop them. She ran to the staff bathroom and locked the door behind her, sobbing so loudly that she had to cover her mouth with her hands. She cried for Rose, who had thought she was doing the right thing. She cried for William, who might have been missing her all these years. And she cried for herself, the little girl who had grown up thinking her father did not love her. That night, Emily lay in bed staring at the ceiling again. But this time she was not angry. She was sad and scared, but she was also determined. She still remembered the address from the burned letter. Whitby, a coastal town 4 hours north by train. Maybe it was not too late to find the truth. Maybe it was not too late to find her father. Emily called Mrs. Henderson on Monday morning to ask for a week off work. She had never taken time off without planning it months ahead. But Mrs. Henderson could hear something different in Emily's voice and agreed without asking to. Many questions. Emily packed a small canvas bag with enough clothes for 3 days, though she was not sure how long she would actually stay in Whitby. She also packed the old photo of herself as a child that she kept on her bedside table. In the picture, she was 5 years old, wearing a blue dress with white flowers, sitting on a swing in the garden behind Rose's house. Her hair was in pigtails, and she was smiling at whoever was taking the picture. Emily hoped the photo might help her father recognize her, since she looked very different now as a grown woman. The train station in London was busy and loud, full of people rushing to catch trains to different parts of the country. Emily bought her ticket and found a seat by the window in a quiet car. As the train pulled away from the platform, she felt her stomach fill with butterflies. She was really doing this. After 23 years, she was going to look for her father. The journey to Whitby took 4 hours, giving Emily plenty of time to think and worry. She stared out the window as the train moved through green countryside dotted with sheep and small villages. The spring weather was beautiful, with clear blue skies and fields full of yellow flowers, but Emily barely noticed the scenery. Instead, she found herself remembering small things about her father that she had forgotten over the years. She remembered his laugh, which was deep and warm and made her feel safe. She remembered the way he used to make funny voices when he read bedtime stories to her, giving each character a different accent that made her giggle. She remembered that he used to call her little bird because she was always singing and humming round the house. These memories surprised Emily. For so many years, she had tried not to think about her father at all. When she did remember him, it was usually with anger about the day he left. But now, sitting on the train, she was remembering the good times too. She was remembering a father who had loved her, even if only for a short time. About noon, Emily went to the train dining. car to buy a sandwich and a cup of tea. The car was not very busy, and she sat at a small table near the window. At the table across from her was an elderly man with grey hair and kind eyes. He was reading a newspaper. But he looked up and smiled when Emily sat down. The man introduced himself as George, and they began talking about their journeys. George was travelling to Manchester to see his son after 10 years of not speaking to each other. They had argued about money and family problems, and both had been too proud to be the first one to apologize. "My wife died last month," George told Emily quietly. "It made me realize that life is too short to hold on to anger. Pride is a heavy thing to carry. Sometimes we have to put it down to pick up something better." Emily found herself telling George about her own journey, about the letter she had found and burned, and about her father who might be dying in Whitby. George listened carefully and nodded with understanding. "You are brave to make this trip," he said. "Not everyone has the courage to face the past." Later in the afternoon, Emily moved to a different seat and found herself sitting next to a young woman about her own age. The woman had short blonde hair and was reading a book about forgiveness and healing. Her name was Kate, and she was returning home from visiting her mother for the first time in 5 years. Kate told Emily that her mother had made some terrible mistakes when Kate was a teenager, mistakes that had hurt the whole family. Kate had been angry for years and had refused to speak to her mother, but recently she had decided to try to understand her mother's side of the story. "Understanding someone does not mean agreeing with their choices," Kate said thoughtfully, "but it can help you find peace. I learned that my mother was dealing with problems I never knew about. It does not excuse what she did, but it helps me see her as a real person instead of just the villain in my story." Kate's words stayed with Emily for the rest of the train journey. She began to think about her father not just as the man who had left her, but as a real person who might have had reasons for his choices that she did not understand. By the time the train pulled into Whitby station in the early evening, Emily's anger had softened into something that felt more like nervous hope. She walked through the small seaside town, carrying her bag and breathing the salt air that blew in from the North Sea. The town was pretty and peaceful, with narrow streets and old stone buildings that looked like they had been there for hundreds of years. Emily found a small bed and breakfast near the harbour and booked a room for 2 nights. The owner, a friendly woman named Margaret, showed her to a cozy room with a view of the sea. Emily sat on the bed and looked out at the water, gathering courage for what she would do tomorrow. She would look for William tonight. She would rest and prepare her heart for whatever she might find. Emily woke up early on her first morning in Whitby, too nervous to sleep any longer. She had breakfast at the bed and breakfast, but she could barely eat the toast and eggs that Margaret had prepared for her. Her stomach was full of butterflies, and her hands were shaking as she drank her tea. She spent the morning walking round the small town, trying to build up courage to look for her father. Whitby was a beautiful place, with old fishing boats in the harbour and seagulls calling overhead. The smell of salt water and fish reminded her of a holiday she had taken with Rose when she was 10 years old. Emily asked several people if they knew William, but no one recognized the name. She was starting to worry that he might have moved away or that Rose's letter had been wrong about his address. Just before lunch, she decided to try the local community center, thinking that maybe someone there would know him. The community center was a cheerful building painted yellow, with flower boxes under the windows. Emily could hear children's voices coming from inside as she pushed open the front door. She followed the sound down a hallway and found herself at the entrance to a large room where story time was happening. About 15 children were sitting in a circle on colorful cushions, listening to a man read from a picture book. The man was sitting in a comfortable chair, holding the book so all the children could see the pictures. His hair was grey and much thinner than Emily remembered, and his face had deep lines round his eyes. He looked older and much thinner than she expected, but Emily knew immediately that this was William. His voice was still gentle and warm as he read the story of a little rabbit who had gotten lost in tea. He was trying to find its way home. He did different voices for the rabbit and the other animals in the story. Just like Emily remembered from when she was small, the children were completely focused on the story. Their eyes wide with excitement, Emily stood in the doorway, not sure what to do. She felt like her heart was going to beat right out of her chest. This was really her father, sitting just a few meters away from her, reading to children the way he used to read to her, when the story ended. The children clapped and asked William to read another one. He smiled and told them that story time was over for today, but that he would be back next week with more books. The children began to put on their coats and gather their things, chattering about the story as their parents came to collect them. Emily waited until all the children had left before she approached William. He was putting the books back on a shelf, humming quietly to himself. When Emily said his name, he turned around with a friendly smile, probably expecting to see another parent. "William," Emily said quietly. Her voice sounded strange and shaky. "I am Emily, your daughter." William's face went completely white, and for a moment Emily thought he might fall down. His hands dropped to his sides, and his mouth opened, but no words came out. Then his eyes filled with tears, and Emily could see that he was shaking just as much as she was. "Emily," he whispered, "my little bird, is it really you?" They stood looking at each other for what felt like a very long time. Emily could see her own eyes looking back at her from William's face, and she could see that he was trying not to cry. Finally, he suggested that they go sit in the center's small garden, where they could talk privately. The garden had a few wooden benches and some flower beds full of spring flowers. Emily and William sat on a bench, leaving space between them, because they both felt too nervous to sit too close. For several minutes, neither of them knew what to say. "You look just like your mother," William finally said, "but you have my eyes." Over the next few days, Emily stayed in Whitby and met with William every afternoon. He told her his story slowly, sometimes stopping because it was too painful to continue. He explained that he had struggled with drinking when Emily was young. The problem had gotten worse and worse until he was drinking every day and could not stop. One terrible night when Emily was 5, William had come home drunk and angry about something at work. He had shouted at Emily's mother and had knocked over a lamp, which broke and scared Emily so much that she ran to her room crying. When William saw how frightened his little girl was, he realized that he was becoming dangerous to the people he loved most. The next morning, William had made the hardest decision of his life. He decided to leave rather than risk hurting Emily and her mother again. He packed a small bag and took a train to Whitby, where he had grown up as a child. He found help for his drinking problem and slowly built a new life, but he felt too ashamed to go back to his family. "I thought staying away was protecting you," he whispered to Emily as they sat in the garden. "I was wrong about many things, but never about loving you." William showed Emily boxes full of letters he had written to her over the years but had never sent, birthday cards for every year she had missed, Christmas wishes, stories about his recovery and his pride in the woman she had become, based on what Rose had told him in her letters. Emily cried as she read letter after letter filled with love she never knew existed. Emily learned more difficult news during her second day in Whitby. William was very sick with cancer that had spread through his body. The doctors had told him he had only a few weeks left to live. This was why Rose had written the letter. Why? She had finally decided to tell Emily the truth. Emily's first thought was to return home immediately. This was too much to handle, too painful to face. She had just found her father, and now she was going to lose him again. But as she sat with William in his small cottage near the sea, watching him struggle to make tea with hands that shook from his illness, she made a different choice instead of running away. Emily decided to stay in Whitby to care for William during his final weeks. She called Mrs. Henderson to ask for more time off work, explaining that there was a family emergency. She also called the bed and breakfast to extend her stay, though Margaret was so kind that she offered Emily a room at a much lower price. When she learned about the situation, Emily and William spent their days walking slowly along the seafront, talking about everything they had missed during the 23 years they had been apart. The sea air was fresh and clean, and William said it helped him feel stronger. They would sit on benches facing the water, watching fishing boats come and go, sharing stories about their lives. Emily told William about her job at the library and how much she loved being surrounded by books. Every day she talked about her dream of writing children's stories someday, though she had never been brave enough to try. William listened carefully to everything she said, asking questions about her favorite books and encouraging her to pursue her writing dreams. William told Emily about her mother, sharing memories that Emily had never heard before. He described how intelligent and strong her mother had been, how she had worked 2 jobs to support the family after William left, and how she had always spoken kindly about William even after he was gone. He told Emily that her mother had a beautiful, singing voice and had passed that gift on to their daughter. She would be so proud of the woman you have become, William said one afternoon as they watched seagulls flying over the harbor. You have her kindness and her strength, but you also have something that is completely your own. In the evenings, Emily would read to William in his small living room, which was filled with bookshelves and smelled like the sea. She read him children's stories, just like he had read to her when she was small. She also read poetry and novels that they both loved. Discovering that they had very similar tastes in books, William shared memories of Emily as a little girl that she had forgotten. He remembered how she used to make up songs about everything she saw, turning everyday activities like brushing her teeth or eating breakfast into little musical performances. He remembered how she used to collect smooth stones from the garden and arrange them in patterns, creating what she called stone pictures. I am sorry for all the bedtime stories I missed, William said one evening, his voice weak but full of love. I am sorry for all the birthdays and Christmas mornings. I am sorry I was not there to teach you to ride a bicycle or to help you with your homework. Emily cried often during those 3 weeks. But they were different tears than the angry ones. She had cried at home. These tears were for sadness and loss, but also for gratitude and healing. She was grateful to have found her father before it was too late, grateful to learn that he had never stopped loving her. William grew weaker each day, spending more time sleeping and less time able to walk by the sea. Emily would sit beside his bed, reading to him or just holding his hand. Sometimes he would wake up and tell her another memory from when she was small, or share another story about her mother. On a quiet Tuesday morning 3 weeks after Emily had arrived in Whitby, William passed away peacefully while Emily was holding his hand. His last words were, "Thank you for coming back to me, little bird." Emily cried harder than she ever had in her life, but she also felt a strange sense of peace. She had been with him at the end, and he had died knowing that his daughter loved him. Emily stayed in Whitby for a few more days to arrange William's funeral and to sort through his belongings. She found more letters he had written to her over the years, as well as newspaper clippings about the library where she worked and photos of her that Rose had sent to him. She realized that he had been following her life from a distance, celebrating her successes and worrying about her struggles. When Emily returned home to her flat above the bookshop, she felt like a completely different person than the one who had left just a month before. She no longer needed the physical letter she had. Burnt in anger, the words of love and regret were now written in her heart, in the memories she and William had made together during his final weeks. The first thing Emily did was call her best friend Lucy to apologize for pushing her away. Then she called James to ask for his forgiveness and to tell him how much she had missed him. Both of them welcomed her back with open arms. Understanding that she had needed time to work through her pain, Emily began writing down the stories William had shared about her childhood and her mother. She also started volunteering at the children's reading program at her own library, just as William had done in Whitby.